Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone around the world. I'm honored to welcome you all to this webinar interview with the CEO of Ocuphire Pharma, Dr. George McGrath. I'm Echo Hindoyang, the CEO at MSQ Ventures, a New York-based cross-border advisory firm specialized in life science. Dr. McGrath joined Ocuphire in November 2023, bringing with him a wealth of experience in medical and business administration. He is uniquely positioned to lead Ocuphire through its next phase of innovation and growth. As we proceed, Dr. McGrath will share more about Ocuphire's journey, their innovative pipeline, and what lies ahead for the company. We will also dive into the strategic decisions that continue to position Ocuphire as a leader in the field of the ophthalmic biopharma. We are pleased to co-host this webinar with Bio Around the World, a platform that aims to streamline the cross-border collaboration on global drug development by sharing real-life practice experience to achieve greater harmonization. So without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Dr. George McGrath. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Echo. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I remember you are in South Carolina now?
Yes, I am. So I grew up in South Carolina, and I came back after a number of years in the Philadelphia area. And so it's great to be back. Yeah.
You're so lucky. So stay close to the family. And also, yes. I remember you attended the medical school there and practiced as the physician there. So could you please tell us more about your background, how you get into the biotech from the medical practice?
Oh, yeah, sure. So my background, I'm an ophthalmologist. I'm an eye doctor. And I trained in medical school and residency at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston. And after that, I went to Philadelphia for my fellowship. And I did my fellowship in ocular oncology. And subsequently went back to, at one point in my career, to South Carolina and developed the ocular oncology program for the state. But while I was in Philadelphia, I got really interested in biotech. And I was on the capital market side. I was working as an equity analyst for some time for a company called Edison Investment Research. Spent a little bit of time with a hedge fund before moving into true development. And so I went to a company named Hovione, which was a Portuguese-based company where I was part of a team developing in inhalation ophthalmology and dermatology. And I was there for a number of years. I think it was about 8 years or so, and then went to a company called Lexitas. And Lexitas was a pharma services provider where we ran clinical trials for ophthalmology, and I was the CEO there. And we grew the company from 35 people when I started to around 200, and we were doing anywhere from 30 to 40 ophthalmic clinical programs at a time. It was a blast. And the company transacted, and it became a natural sort of transition point. And I had seen the data from Ocuphire, and I knew what they were trying to accomplish with a paradigm shift in ophthalmology. And I saw in the patient level data some real biologic activity in my mind. And so it was a real honor and pleasure to be able to join the company in November of last year.
Wow, what kind of a journey you had. You really worked on the ecosystem of the biotech from the medical practice and then to the capital market, even the investor, and then the CRO service provider. So you get the great insight, and now you joined because you saw the data and you get the great insight. So that's how you can make the company successful, right? So after actually this kind of almost 6-7 months as a CEO for Ocuphire. So how do you what's the new strategy you land ahead for the company?
Oh yeah, so well, the first thing we did at Ocuphire was we built a lean but robust team. right? So we're very capital efficient, but at the same time, we brought in the right expertise to execute against our diabetic retinopathy program. And so we were really fortunate. We got a great chief financial officer, a great chief scientific officer, a great chief operating officer, made some other key hires throughout the company. And so we really got the company at the right size and the right skill level. And so that was absolutely the first job, was to get the right people in the seat. The second job was to outline the vision for the company, right? And the vision for the company really is to change the paradigm in how we treat diabetic retinopathy. It's the #1 cause of blindness in America, and nobody, there aren't really many treatments that are available for people before they have some of the bad complications of it. And we have some real promising data that might be helpful in that area. So we set out the vision for how we were going to develop it. And what we're doing in the development program is taking a very methodical, very scientific, data-driven approach to as efficiently and as high quality as we can answer the question about whether or not we have biologic activity in this indication. So that was the vision, right? We laid out the development plan. We laid out the roadmap to get there, and we're sort of full steam ahead. So it's a lot of fun.
Sounds great. And so, and probably I assume there's a lot of challenges as well, since actually it's I think your first time really operated a biotech company, right? And also it's a public company. So what are the challenges you faced in the past few months?
Oh yeah, of course. There's challenges all the way around. I think the main challenge we have is really is the main challenge that we're seeing or we're dealing with is really around the communication. We have got being a public company, it's widely disseminated, right? We have so many different shareholders, so many different types of groups that have invested in Ocuphire. And our job and our hope is to be able to communicate as effectively as we can across the board to all of the different shareholders and stakeholders in the company. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how we communicate, right? And how we get the message out about what we're doing, why we're doing it, when we're doing it, and how much it's going to cost and things like that. And so that's something that takes particular attention at Ocuphire.
Yeah, I still remember when I managed the public company, we built the spec. It's a lot of process you have to procedure. So maybe
Yes.
that's your doctor background actually helps to follow all the procedure designed by ACEC. So
Mhm.
that's how I adopted. Yeah, I know like you even like you're so busy and like, your career have been it seems you always make the changes under from the physician to the investor even and to the active research and then to listen the journey. You also have the 4 kids. How do you like integrate all this together?
Oh, well, so for my work life, my true north is to try to make the best impact I can, right? So I'm always looking for the opportunity that has the most transformational value for our field, right? For eye care. And so at some points in my career, that's treating individual patients. At other points in my career, it's been working in capital allocation in the capital markets to make sure that the best projects get funded. And then at other times in my career, like now, there's transformational science that really deserves to be developed and could potentially be really impactful for a lot of people. That as a clinician, I'd love to have something like APX available for my diabetic patients. So really that's my true north, right? So
Yeah.
everything I do in my career it goes back to that, just trying to figure out how I make the biggest impact on our small profession when I can. And then you're right, I am busy. I have 4 kids. So between the ages right now of 12 to 3. So I do a lot of sporting events and school events and stuff like that in between. So that's my hobby after work. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
But definitely see the kids grow up is rewarding. Actually, I just see how my little one grow from 0 to 9 months long. It's rewarding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know like your company have actually is one of the biotech company have been set up with so many the different partnership with with Viatris and Bioscience,
Mhm.
even with the Chinese company Haicheng. So
Mhm.
how do you see such the partnership with the different company shape your strategy?
Yeah. Well, the strategy was laid out by the predecessor of mine, and she did a wonderful job of laying out the strategy with Beatrice. And I think that that project, the Resume V project, which is now commercially available as of April 1st, so we're excited, was really a very great thing for the company and for patients, right? So what that product is used for is to reverse dilation after an eye exam, and so it's a very, very practical medication where patients that get dilated for their eye exam end up being able to get Resume V and go back to normal vision very quickly within 30 or 30 minutes or an hour. And so that with Beatrice gave us a strong financial position and strong financial foothold. And I'm very grateful to the predecessors of mine at the company for setting that up. And it really has given us a springboard for our transformational project, which is in diabetic eye disease.
Mm. Yeah. So how do you see this? You mentioned, yeah. How do you see this partnership in the different ways to speed up your drug development?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, with Resume V, it's a mass market drug, right? There are, I think, 100 million or so dilated eye exams a year. And so to have a commercial force that goes after that, you have to have a very wide reach. And so that was a lot of the benefit of Beatrice, right? Is that they have the commercial expertise and they have the sales force and they have the people in place to do a wide dissemination of this product, which would have been very hard for us to do without the partnership. And so I think that one of the keys to any development program is to really think about what the core strengths of your company are and what the core strengths of your company are not, and wide dissemination of a cash pay product like Resume would have been difficult for Ocuphire to do without a partnership with Viatris. So it really sped things up. It was fantastic, and they're a wonderful partner. So we're really lucky to have them.
That's really true. The good partner is so important, just like a
Mhm.
marriage, right? Is
Yeah,
can they can build you the better or destroy you. But
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, it sounds like they are making very good progress with all your partnership. So
Mhm.
next, I would like to invite you to share more information about your pipeline and the strategy and the partnership you are looking for, so we can share with the audience.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you, Echo. And
Thank you.
so it really it starts with the team, and I'll show you the team here. We're very fortunate to have Nirav Javari, who has a lot of capital market experience as a banker and an analyst, and he's been a CFO at Insilico and Journey, and so he comes to us with a wealth of knowledge. And then also Ash is our Chief Scientific and Development Officer, and he developed in diabetic retinopathy at Roche and at Kodiak. And so he has a lot of experience from the development aspect of diabetic eye disease and really brings a wealth of knowledge. And Joe also is our Chief Operating Officer. He's built he's built pharmaceutical companies, he's built biotech companies, he's been in there his entire career and really is an operational expert and really helps us with that aspect of it. And so it's a really powerful team. And we added a couple more. We added Kim Morris, who Kim has been working with me for quite some time, and she works with us on medical affairs and communications and stuff like that. And I'll tell you that the fun thing about this team is that they've been involved in a lot of the most meaningful products in ophthalmology in recent history. And you can see the list here on the slide. So the team is really where it starts. We've got a really expert team that's really designed and developed everything you're going to see in this slide deck. And so it's really great. But we are after really a paradigm shift, like I mentioned. Diabetic eye disease is the leading cause of blindness in America. 10 million patients have it. And right now, there's no treatment until you've lost vision, right? Once you get to this vision-threatening complications or vision loss, then there's approved therapies that are that try to bring you back. But what we're trying to do is give patients and physicians an option to slow down that progression, to try to prevent you from ever getting there. And I'd use the analogy, I think of it similar to like a statin, right? So people with high cholesterol get treated with a statin for decades to try to prevent a heart attack. And so in diabetic eye disease, we need something where we can treat patients for a long time to try to prevent blindness. And so that's what we're after. And we do that because we're delivered orally, right? So the current treatments for diabetic eye disease are all invasive therapies. They're all injections in the eye. And those are well tolerated. We do a lot of them. Physicians are very comfortable with them. But at the end of the day, if you're asymptomatic and you need a chronic treatment, most people don't want to be injected with needles in both eyes. And so an oral pill that goes after and targets those same pathways is really a really compelling value proposition. And so we've tested this in phase 2, which we call Zeta 1. And what we'll show you in Zeta 1 is that when we look at what the FDA wants, which is slowing of progression on this diabetic retinopathy severity scale, you see that fewer patients progress in APX compared to placebo. When you look at the patients who developed vision-threatening complication of proliferative disease, there's fewer patients in APX. And then when you look at least one line of vision loss, fewer patients lost vision. So you really are starting to build the story for what the regulatory endpoint is, what the physicians care about, and what the patients ultimately care about. It's all pointing in the right direction. So it's very, very compelling thing in the data. So that we're at an inflection point right now, right? So we've completed the phase 2. We're ready to go into pivotal trials, and we've submitted our protocol to the FDA as part of special protocol assessment. And we should get feedback from that in the near future. And so once we get that back, we'll hopefully be ready to go pending that feedback, right? We got to get alignment with the FDA first, though. We've got a proven development team that I just went over. It's really a pleasure and honor to work with them. And then we have Rezumvi, which is a financial asset for us, as I mentioned earlier. It's great that Viatris is commercializing it, and we're recognizing royalties and future milestones from that. And so it's nice to be able to help finance the company using that. So as you mentioned, it's our pipeline, right? So APX 3330 for retinopathy is our lead project. We also think the same mechanism might be effective in geographic atrophy. And then you also see the Rezumvi franchise down here. So the reversal of dilation, or mydriasis, is the one that's listed up top. That's the one that's commercially available. Presbyopia and then what I call dim light disturbance are the other two. These are in phase 3, and they're fully funded phase 3s by our partner Viatris. And so we're conducting these phase 3s right now. So back to diabetic retinopathy. So like I was saying, patients are identified with diabetic retinopathy at their eye exam when they still have a minimal visual disruption or nothing at all, right? They get routine eye exams, and you can actually see the diabetic retinopathy long before they progress on to vision loss. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to treat people way over here at the minimal visual disruption, what's called NPDR, before they get to significant vision loss, or PDR, where most patients are now treated. So we're trying to slow this progression. And that's really the whole name of the game. And it's important to know that you can identify this disease very, very early on. It's just that right now we don't have a non-invasive good treatment for these patients. So right now you see in these NPDR patients, you can see the blood vessels are weak. You can see they close off, they leak. And there's not really anything you do about it. You know, you just tell the patient that you're going to watch it, do their best to control their blood sugars. And when they develop this proliferative disease is when you start treating them with one of the 3 approved therapies for this, 6 approved therapies for diabetic eye disease. So if you look at the market, it's huge, right? So 10 million diabetics in the United States. Of those, 2 million have that vision-threatening disease, right? That PDR that we talked about. And these patients are treated with one of 3 anti-VEGFs, right? So Lucentis, Eylea, or Vabysmo. Now there's some biosimilars and other things, but these are the core products that are approved for the treatment of this. We're really after the 8 million NPDR patients that have not yet developed vision loss. And so it's really a big market, big opportunity to make an impact on patients and to improve people's lives by preventing them from flipping over. So there's the competitive landscape here. There's a number of other companies working in it, but what I'll tell you is we think we're the most advanced. I group these in non-invasive therapies versus invasive therapies. And I do that because the non-invasive is important, because as part of the target product profile, you need to be able to treat these asymptomatic patients with a very, very well-tolerated non-invasive therapy, or else it's not really amenable to long-term chronic treatment of asymptomatic patients. So it's a very important aspect to our target product profile. So the science is actually very elegant here. So what APX 3330 targets is a transcription factor called REF1. REF1 is implicated in VEGF, or angiogenesis, oxidative stress through NRF2, and then inflammation through NF-kappa B, TNF-alpha, and IL-6. And so 2 of these pathways are already validated in diabetic eye disease. So you can see here, angiogenesis is targeted by 3 major products in ophthalmology. Inflammation in diabetic eye disease is targeted by 3 major products in ophthalmology. Nobody targets both of them with a single product. So we're the first, most advanced therapy that does both inflammation and angiogenesis. So it's a super cool mechanism that we have here. And I'll tell you that in the preclinical data, what I'll highlight on this slide is why we're able to do this when other people haven't. So the reason that you give anti-VEGF as an injection into the eye is because if you give it intravenously, it has a tough tolerability profile. You know, bevacizumab, or Avastin, was the first one used by Phil Rosenfeld and the team in Miami at Bascom Palmer in the mid-2000s for macular degeneration. But when you give it to patients systemically, it's actually indicated for refractive colon cancer, and it has a really tough systemic tolerability profile. So they started injecting it in the eye. Well, our product actually doesn't deplete the VEGF completely. So it restores it, because of transcription factor, it restores it to a homeostatic level, which means that we can deliver it orally without having the depletion of VEGF and other organ systems that can cause side effects. And so it really creates a good safety tolerability profile while still achieving the therapeutic benefit that we're after. Now, the inflammation is through, like I said, NF-kappa B, TNF-alpha, and IL-6, which is pretty interesting as well. Very, very well correlated with the disease we're after. And then the oxidative stress aspect is really interesting as well. But I want to go into our clinical data because that's the most fun part. We ran Zeta 1, which was a phase 2 study It's randomized 1-to-1 to placebo versus APX. So 103 patients, half of them got APX, half of them got placebo, and they were followed for 6 months. Now, the primary endpoint, and this is a critical thing about this study, primary endpoint and the design of this study overall was based on the predicate studies in diabetic retinopathy. The predicate studies were all for unilateral invasive therapies that were trying to take really severe patients and bring them back. Well, this is a different paradigm. So while the study was set up in a way that was modeled after the predicate designs, what the FDA actually wanted to see and what the communications were after the study was finished was, okay, let's tailor this to an oral therapy, right? Let's get the patients and let's look at worsening rather than improvement, because we're trying to slow worsening. Let's look at both eyes rather than just one eye. And let's and then we'll need to follow them for a year. So there were some differences in trial design, and that's the reason why our Zeta 2 study is going to be a 2/3, a little bit more capital efficient study, because what we want to do is take this feedback from the agency, take this biologic activity that we see, and prove it out a priori before we do anything aggressive. And so it's a real methodical way of drug development. But this is the key regulatory endpoint, and this is called the Diabetic Retinopathy Severity Scale. And you can see here patients with no diabetic retinopathy in the orange. And then you've got the asymptomatic disease. This is NPDR. And then you've got the symptomatic disease, which is PDR. And what ends up happening is on the images, you take a photograph of the patient's eye, and then you assign that photograph a score based on how the blood vessels look. And that score can be a 10, 20, 43, 47, all the way to 71. Now, to look at both eyes, you got to transform a score from both eyes into a single score. And that's called the binocular person level scale. And so what this does is it gives you a number from 1 to 17 on the diabetic severity for both eyes. So, for example, if you have a 47 and a 43, 47 in the right, 43 in the left, you'd fall as an 8. If you have a 53 in both eyes, you'd fall in as a 10. It's that kind of transformation. And what the FDA cares about is 3 steps of worsening. So what they care about is going from, say, a 10 to a 13. Okay, so that's considered progression by the FDA. So the endpoint's fairly simple. The endpoint is the proportion of patients that worsen by at least 3 steps at a year. So when you look at our data on that, on the FDA registration endpoint, here's what you would have seen in Zeta 1. So 3 steps of worsening, 3 or more steps of worsening in the placebo arms, 13% versus 5% in the APX arm. So you see a more than 50% reduction in risk here. So that's great, right? So that's what we need to replicate for the FDA to get approval. But the biology doesn't kind of stop there, right? We see a lot more trends in the biology that are important for us to get a handle on whether or not this is real. And so if you look at least 4 steps, you see that is an even more pronounced difference. And then if you look at the patients who actually improved, you see a trend towards APX in the right direction, correct? So what I've shown you so far is the first logical step, right? So on the FDA's preferred measure of diabetic retinopathy severity, fewer patients worsened, more patients improved on APX compared to placebo. If you look at the clinician favored endpoint, that's conversion to proliferative disease. And that's important for clinicians because this is typically when they start treating patients, right? When they start injecting the eye or doing laser therapies. If you look at that in placebo, you got 27% versus 15% in APX. So again, it's going in the right direction. And then the last step of the logical progression is the patients who lost at least a line of vision. And you see the 26% versus 13%. So really what the data has shown at a high level is that on the retinopathy severity scale that the FDA wants, you've got fewer patients worsening in the APX arm, more patients improving in the APX arm. You've got fewer patients developing the clinician favored outcome, which is PDR, and you've got fewer patients with the ultimate endpoint, which is the vision loss. So it's really, really meaningful data here. And it really compares well to some of the predicate examples that we've given. So on this slide, I gave the example earlier of a statin. So statins are used chronically to try to prevent a heart attack. And 88 patients treated for 5 years prevents 1 patient from developing coronary artery disease. If Zeta-1 data holds, and this is true, then 8 patients treated for 6 months will prevent 1 patient from converting to PDR. So from a health economic standpoint, it's a very, very meaningful improvement in patients, and improvement in the health system. So we think it compares really well to some of the predicate preventive or therapies that slow progression. The key thing I talked about earlier is that it has to be allowed. You have to, if you're going to treat patients who are asymptomatic, it's got to be safe and well tolerated, right? And that's a key. And here's our adverse event profile. And this drug has now been in 12 studies, and I think this is a pretty representative AE profile for the other studies as well, where the main thing that we saw that's in the APX arm is itching and rash. And so, you can see here 12% and 6% in the APX arm had itching and rash respectively. Now it's typically self-limited, and it was treated in several cases with Benadryl, but it's a side effect, but it's not a bad one, right? It's something that's tolerable. So we think the tolerability profile is favorable for this drug. And so that leads us into what are we doing next? And so what we've done is we're working with the FDA currently, and we're trying to get approval of the special protocol assessment to codify this, and that's our step right now. But what we're designing really is a Zeta-2 study, which takes the feedback from the FDA, the feedback from the ophthalmic community, all the stakeholders, and builds it into a paradigm shifting protocol, which will go for a year. It'll look at both eyes rather than one. We'll look at 300 patients. And then we've made some adjustments to the inclusion and exclusion criteria to try to get patients who are likely to be at risk for progression. And that's important because really the rate of progression of the placebo arm is going to be critical to the trial design. So if the placebo arm progresses by 20 to 30% at a year, then the drug will have a good chance of showing a delta. If you get more mild patients in the study, they may not progress over the year, right? It may take 2 years, it may take 3 years for them to progress, and you won't catch it in your study. So we're very cognizant in Zeta-2 in our study design that we really want these patients in yellow who are at high risk for progression. And the literature says if you get these patients, you should get a progression to PDR of 26% for these 47s, and then higher than that for the 53s. And here's the table from the landmark study that showed this. And so we're tailoring our study to make sure that we get these patients at highest risk in the study, because those are the patients that really need to be intervened with, right? Those are the patients that need treatment. So that's what that's a high level of what we've done, right? The data goes a mile deep underneath that, and then the thought process behind the design of Zeta-2 goes a lot deeper as well. But what we're really doing is trying to enrich the population to get the patients at most risk for progression of their NPDR, progression of their diabetic retinopathy to vision-threatening disease, and then we're trying to show that we can slow that down with APX. And so that's what we're after. Now, we work with like I said earlier, on my team, I've got what I think are the best people in the world that are for developing in diabetic retinopathy. We also have the best advisors that we can find. And I'll tell you that some of these comments are really important, particularly this first one, where our product will not be competitive with the intravitreal injections. It'll be complementary. We view this as just like Dr. Heyer views it, which is that all patients with NPDR, virtually all patients with NPDR, will be placed on APX, and then they'll be treated with the local therapies when they have breakthrough disease, right? When they have if they do develop vision loss, then they get their injections, or they get their laser therapy or their surgery. But this can be complementary to it. Could even be prescribed by ophthalmologists, optometrists, other providers who don't do invasive treatments. So it's a really interesting target product profile, really elegant biology, and a really great clinical development program. So lastly, something you mentioned at the beginning is our partnership with Viatris, which is really important to us and we value it. It's really to commercialize Rezumvi and also 2 additional indications. And they fully funded the phase 3 programs that we're running in those. We have received the first upfront of $35 million and the first milestone of $10 million upon Rezumvi approval. And Rezumvi is commercially available, so we are getting royalty payments now. And so the presbyopia trial for this product is in phase 3, and there's clinical startup activities going on now. And then the dim light disturbances indication has enrolled their first few patients in April. So that study is going for phase 3. So these are the 2 additional indications that Rezumvi should come online for in the future. So we're very excited about the Rezumvi franchise as well, and very fortunate to be partnered with Viatris on that. And that's where we're at. You know, it's a fun company because it's a great mix of a transformational asset in the diabetic retinopathy program, plus a revenue generating asset that is very impactful for anterior segment. So that's good.
Thanks, George, for the very inspiring presentation. And also I can see how you enjoy and also your passion about what you're doing and about the team and your pipeline. I really get the infected about your passion about it. So I think we actually collected some questions in advance, especially for the assets. So the question is, what is the difference between the inhibiting the REF1 and the directly inhibiting VEGF in terms of efficacy and safety? I think you mentioned about it. Can you dive into deep?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest difference is that by regulating a transcription factor, you actually restore homeostatic VEGF levels rather than depleting them completely. So when you inject an anti-VEGF in the eye, you know, so for wet AMD, you inject Eylea, you're injecting around 1,000-fold concentration than the VEGF that's present. So you really sequester and take the VEGF very, very low. And so that's wonderful for acute disease. That's not tolerable systemically for chronic disease. So what we're doing by restoring homeostatic levels is really balancing complete inhibition and the dramatic impact that has with the side effect profile. And so what we're seeing is what my suggestion would be, my thought process on this would be that this is why this is not a replacement for anti-VEGF injections. This is why it's complementary, is because if you have somebody who has an acute incident, they probably need to be injected to be aggressively treated. If you have a patient that has early disease, they just need it normalized over a long period of time. And so I think it gives a very, very complementary mechanism of action to the anti-VEGF antibodies that we have available.
That's very interesting. So you say that they are not directly, they compete with others, but actually it's complementary. So could you please just dive into a little bit deep, so how they complementary, or how do you see the data to show such their complementary effects?
Yeah, so I as an oral therapy, the prescriber base can be much broader for this. So there's only a certain, only retina specialists really, and some general ophthalmologists are trained to do the invasive therapies. But almost all providers can prescribe oral medicines. And so really these patients, when they're caught early in disease, can be treated by patients or by providers that otherwise wouldn't have anything to offer these patients, right? And so early in disease, they can be treated at the site of care. The second thing is that the second thing really is that the still be breakthrough disease, right? There will, with the oral treatment, there will still be patients who progress. There will still be patients who develop PDR, develop vision loss. And so when I say complementary, what I mean is that these patients can get put on APX, but then if they're unfortunate enough to fall in these categories where they need additional therapy, then they can be treated with the intravitreals. So this 15% of patients with PDR would be a great patient population to get intravitreal therapy.
Okay. Yeah, that's make a much difference now, right?
Yeah.
And so what do you see the real, like, I think you mentioned about some of the advantage of the Apex 330. So over the current standard of the care.
The biggest advantage is the delivery method and the tolerability, right? So the fact that you can take this pill and you don't have to get shots in the eye is a big advantage. And so we feel like this is de-risked because we're after the same validated pathways, right? The same biology of VEGF and inflammation, but we're after it in a way that is much better tolerated, particularly by asymptomatic patients. So.
Okay. Yeah. So also you mentioned before, actually, you were like the CRO service provider CEO, so you saw a lot of the similar, maybe the treat similar disease drugs in the pipeline. So considering the current research and all the things you have been seeing, so how do you see the the standard care for the AMD or the DME and the DR change in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, we've gotten really, I think that there's been we're really fortunate in ophthalmology because we've seen an amazing transformation of care in AMD, both wet and dry now, in diabetic eye disease and things like that. But it's all been focused on patients with severe disease. So my view on this is that there's two things on the horizon, right? One is going to be getting earlier in the treatment paradigm to try to prevent disease in the first place, right? So I think that we've gotten really good at understanding the pathology and how to modulate that in patients who are in trouble, right? Patients who are going blind. But we don't have the next logical step is to take that upstream and start treating patients who are at risk to try to prevent them from going through that to start with. And that's exactly what we're after at Ocuphire. The other thing that I think is really interesting in ophthalmology that's outside of anything Ocuphire is doing is looking at alternative pathways for some of these diseases. So I think in like wet AMD, subretinal fibrosis is still causing a lot of blindness in those patients. So we've gotten really good at inhibiting VEGF, but some of these other pathways that we're not touching right now may be beneficial to patients in the long term. So I think that we've done a really transformational job, the community has, over the past 15 or 20 years. And I think that we're going to see additional new novel targets that are going to be complementary to what we've already established. And then we're going to see patients being treated long before they lose vision, because it really isn't, one of the things I talk about is it's not normal to just wait for someone to go blind and then try to get their vision back. It's much more normal. It's much more logical to try to prevent it to start with. And that's exactly what Ocuphire is trying to do.
So what do you see? What's the drive behind this change?
Oh, it's because we understand the pathology, right? So when you with the three steroids that are approved for diabetic eye disease and the three anti-angiogenics that are approved for diabetic eye disease, you know, the typical research development sort of paradigm is that when you are first trying to attack a disease, you attack the patients most affected, right? You attack those patients that have already lost vision. And those pathways were proven out in those patients, right? And so now the next logical step is to take that same science and now apply it to the patients who are less symptomatic and see if you can prevent them from becoming symptomatic.
I think this is the also, do you see that is also some diagnostic technology available to can help like
Yes,
the
yes.
physicians to identify
Yeah.
the signs of blind earlier?
It's huge for us. Yeah. I mean, the first artificial intelligence algorithm approved in medicine was for detection of diabetic eye disease on a photograph, and that was several years ago. So it's a ripe field for disruption in the in imaging, and the imaging is critical, right? You got to identify these patients. One of the projects that I did when I first came back to South Carolina, I got funding from the Duke Endowment to place eye cameras across the more rural parts of South Carolina to identify diabetic eye disease in patients that didn't have routine eye care. And those cameras were incredibly effective. I mean, we did at this point, it's probably 15 or 20,000 patients that we've imaged through this set of cameras. We actually have a laser that we take to some of these rural areas and we treat some of these patients. But the imaging capabilities to remotely take a picture in a rural area, have it sent back to us and our team at the medical university was huge. And it was a cool project to be a part of.
So do you use AI in your daily work, like your team?
So I think it will be used. I actually asked ChatGTP to write a protocol one time for me,
Really?
just to play around. I didn't use it, but it did a pretty good job. But
Even you said the ChatGPT did a good job for the protocol.
yeah, it
That's
set out a dry eye
endorsement.
disease protocol. But no, I actually it's in peer review right now. But I just submitted our work on looking at using AI, artificial intelligence, to predict response of diabetic macular edema, a type of diabetic eye disease, based on baseline images. So you take the image of the patient at baseline, and then we have a whole data set of different treatments and how patients responded to those. And the computer developed an algorithm to predict which patients are likely to respond and which won't. And so that's some work that we submitted to one of the journals last week. So yeah, we do a lot with the imaging stuff. It's important.
Really looking forward to how AI disrupt the
Yes.
drug development, right, and speed up the process and save more the patients. That's very incredible. And so, we talked about your leading asset. So let's go to AP the APX 2009 and 2014, in the pipeline now. So what is the position of both of them?
Yeah. So 09 and 14 are also oral therapies for Ref1. So it's the same mechanism. They have a little bit different affinity, different physiochemical properties. And so we think 09 is best targeted towards geographic atrophy, and that's more through IL-6 mediated pathways. And we think it's really differentiated because to have something that inhibits VEGF and also inhibits IL-6, could be a really meaningful improvement over the standard of care, because one of the complications of the current standard of care is development of angiogenesis. And so we suppose or hypothesize that we may have less of that since we inhibit angiogenesis by default here. So we think 09 is very well suited for geographic atrophy. 14 we haven't disclosed yet, but we feel like it's got a really special place in retina too.
So do you see like they will also not replace only the standard of care, but the complementary, what are the current the treatment, or you see differently?
For geographic atrophy for 09?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's complementary. I think it's the same sort of value proposition, right? So Syfovre and Izervay are great intravitreal injections for patients with geographic atrophy to prevent progression. Now, a lot of patients have dry AMD, but not geographic atrophy. Now, right now, those patients all do take an oral tablet. They take AREDS, named after age-related eye disease study that was done by National Institute and Dr. Emily Chu, among others. And so there's a paradigm there to take those to prevent progression or slow progression. I think APX could be used very similarly to that. And it could be given to many more patients because of how non-invasive it is. And then if patients do develop geographic atrophy or worsen of geographic atrophy, they can be treated with Syfovre or Izervay.
That's very promising. Looking forward to their like a very quick progress about the two drugs. So let's take, because we have limited time, we will take the last question is about the commercialized product partnership with Viatris. So you just mentioned about the Resumivy already have their developed the two additional indications. Is that you co-developer with your partner?
Yep.
Or how did that do works?
Yep. So that's a co-development with the partner. It's fully funded, so they're funding the development of the presbyopia and the dim light disturbance indications. And I think that really makes a lot of sense because they're already going to be out there with Resumivy in a sales force. And so adding the additional indications to the sales force's bag will be a natural extension of their product line. And so we're doing our best to efficiently and quickly get these studies done to hopefully get this to patients in the not distant future.
Okay, it's because you see the data, how effective, so that's how you decide to develop for these two indications.
Yep. We've seen good efficacy in phase 2, so we're running phase 3 now. Yeah.
Okay, so when do you expect the two indication will be approved?
Yep. We haven't guided the market on this yet, but these are a little bit longer studies than reversal of mydriasis, so it will take some time to get this development program done. Okay.
Thank you, George. I think that's the conclusion of the webinar today. And thank you so much for your insight about the industry and also Ocuphire. I think that's really see your passion about it, especially your background as a physician. I think this is we really looking forward to the next big milestone of your team and your company.
Yes, thank you, Echo. This has been wonderful, and I appreciate everything you guys are doing. Yeah.
Thank you, and we're looking forward to invite you back to continue the progress you are going to make. And thanks everyone for joining us today. So if you have a further question or you want to contact George, please let us know, or you can reach out to him directly. Thanks again for everyone, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.